Hello everyone, this is Nickredace, and to start off this new year, we're going to begin with the basics of Rustedwarfare modding. I'm going to go over how to use sprites, make a very simple animation for moving and attacking, as well as how to start modding INIs. We'll go over costs, stats, where the unit is built from, tags, and movement. To start with INI modding, it's split into several parts: core, can build, graphics, attack, turn, projectile, movement, and AI. There are some optional ones, such as leg, arm, attachments, effects, animations, and action. Animations can be moved into graphics as well, but we'll get into that later. There might be a few more, but those are quite complex, and we'll look at them far later in this series. We'll start with the core. The first section of core is called common keys, and most units and buildings will have these lines. Name, which is the unique name of the unit, not the name that will be displayed in-game. That will be in a separate section. Class, which is always going to be set to custom unit metadata for now. Price, the cost of the unit. Mass affects how the unit is affected by other units. So unit with heavier mass hitting a unit with lower mass, the heavier mass will push the one with lower mass out of the way. Tech level, there's 3 tiers in the base game, each with a different color and GUI. Other than that, there's really not much of a difference in game. Build speed affects the time in which it takes for a unit to be made. Radius is the circle around non-building units, which affects where you can select the unit and the area in which the unit collides with other units. If you have this set too small on larger units, they'll be clipping, so you'll have 2 large units kind of look like they're merging into each other. That usually means that the radius for that unit is too small, and you just have to increase it. The last 3 are is bio, is bug, and is builder. While the first 2 would only affect the unit after death, which creates an additional effect when the unit dies, the last one, is builder, is required for any unit that builds anything. It's more of an AI thing than anything else. Next section are unit stat keys, which are just like the common keys and required by most units in the game. And they are max HP, which is the starting health of the unit, and of course the max health of the unit. Self-regenerate, or how much health the unit regains over time. Max shield, which is just like HP but with a temporary shield that recharges over time, and depending on certain weapon effects you get on, projectile effects, which I'll go into another video, they can pierce shield without dealing any damage to it, or to completely negate it. You can have start shield at 0, which some units have, and you also have shield regen, which is just like self-regen but for shield. Next you have is energy max. Energy max is the max starting energy a unit starts with, and energy itself is a resource that a unit can use for things like point defense, special attacks, transformations, or even building other units. Energy regen, just like all the other regens, except with energy. Energy starting percentage, unlike shield, which just does it start at 0, energy starting percentage can have it where it starts at a certain percentage, which is pretty self-explanatory. Energy needs recharge to full. This is useful for laser defenses or weapon-based actions. For example, what you can use energy with is have it where energy is required to fire like 10 rockets, and then you want a cooldown for those rockets. Well, you'd use energy, have each one of those rockets have a cost, so if you want to fire 10, you make each one of those missiles do 1 energy. You can make the delay between them so they don't all come out at once, and then you have the recharge rate. If you didn't have it set immediately to energy needs recharge to full, what would happen is it would fire all the missiles, and then instead of waiting again till it has enough to fire all of them again, it'll just fire 1 at a time. Next we have armor, which is straight up damage reduction per hit, which is best to use with caution as it causes units to become practically immune to some attacks. For example, if you have an infantry that only does 5 damage, and you have a tank that has 10 armor, well, infantry will only be doing 1 damage to it. Which you might be like, well that makes sense, but as things go on, it can get more and more broken if you had too much armor. Armor min damage to keep is used as a balance to the armor stat. That way a fast firing unit that deals low damage can still take on higher armor units. Pretty much what it means is the armor, when you have a min damage to keep in armor, your armor is not used to protect against a whole bunch of small attacks, it's more to reduce larger attacks. So for example, if you have 100 armor, but the min damage to keep is 5, that 90 projectile that hits you only does 5 damage. But that little infantry soldier is still doing 5 damage as well. The last 4 in this block are just resource generation codes, which we'll come back to later when we make our first extractor for this faction. The last core subcategory we'll look into today will be UI and graphics keys. Show and editor is used when you have multiple upgrades or tiers of unit. It's best to have this set to false with those units so that your editor isn't completely filled with varieties of a single unit. You always want the base unit to have this set to true, or just don't have this at all in the code. It defaults to true, so that you can still test that unit. Next we have is display text. Display text is what the unit will be called in-game. This doesn't have to be unique, nor does it have to match with the unique name of the unit, but it helps with bug testing and such. Next thing we'll go into is display description, which is pretty simple. It's a description of the unit that you'll see in-game. Remember, when using this, if you want to make a separation, just use -n. Both display radius and UI target radius affect what the radius looks like and defaults the standard radius of the unit. Usually you don't have to mess with this. Shield render radius allows you to change the size of the shield without changing the unit's radius. Simple as that. Shield display only on deflection. It hides the shield unless it blocks an attack. What shield deflection display rate affects is the higher the number means that the faster the visual shield blocking goes away. So the faster it is, the more of a bloop it'll be instead of staying there. Show on minimap. Back in the day, this was very useful to make stealth units as the only way for them to be invisible to your enemy on the minimap. The problem with that was it was also invisible to you on the minimap, which means you had to search around for that unit. Show on minimap to enemies. This one replaced the previous, allowing you to see your units, but your enemy would not see the unit on the minimap, meaning it's much harder to lose your own stealth troops. Now that was it for the UI and graphics keys. A few were left out for simplicity's sake, and we'll go over them again in another video. Now in this one that we really need to use that makes many game features in the future viable is tags. Tags, you can add anything in that section, with multiples too, such as infantry, light, small, unarmored, etc. This will interact with other codes later on, from transports to damage calculations to structures and stealth. Is needed for practically any unit you'll ever make. Another one we'll work on is build from blank and build from position. So in this case I have build one. In this case I have build from one name land factory, which means this unit will automatically appear in land factory's build list. This is used so I don't have to go to land factory and add this unit in separately, especially since land factory is a base vanilla unit. It also helps because you can have multiple modded units that add their units to, say, a land factory, and you don't have to mod those mods to just add them to it. Yeah. And position just means a position it'll attempt to get. Now, just because it says something like position 5 doesn't mean it's always going to be on position 5. Depending on the load order, this will be above or below that position. But that's the one you're trying to get it at. Now, that's all we're going to need from core to get a very basic unit out. Now we're going to move on to graphics to see what our unit will look like. The main one for today are image, the file path to your image, which is usually just the name followed by PNG. Image rec, the dead image of your unit, which can be none if you don't want to. Same thing, it'll be the file path .png. Is visible, should be yes, or you can have this not there, and it'll default to yes. Image shadow, which is an image you want the shadow to be, or if set to auto, will be a transparent black silhouette of the original image. You can also, if you do this, it's going to be whatever image you want the shadow to be, .png. You have shadow offset X and Y that allows you to adjust the shadow to your liking to give the unit more or less height and depth. You also have image turn, which is the image of the turn. On this unit, it'll be blank though, and again, it'll be whatever the name of the image in this file is, .png, that you want for the turn. Now, we're going to move on to effects and animation keys. And though not every unit needs these, for this infantry unit, it will. So we start off with the total frames. The total frames is the total amount of frames this unit has in the image file. So the image file, the sprites have to be the same distance apart to avoid clipping. So if you see them, if they have to be 2 apart or 1 apart, usually I use mine 1 apart, they have to be separated that distance. And it goes from left to right. So the frame on the far left is going to be frame 0, and you count from there all the way to the right. That's your end one. We're going to start with moving animation start, on which animation frame you want to start moving. And again, remember that frame start at 0, not 1. The animation moving end, which frame you want the animation to end on. And then moving animation speed. So if we had a 3-frame moving animation, it would start at 0, end at 2. and the speed would be whatever you want to. You'd have to adjust that through game. Animation idle start. Pretty much all of these are going to be animation and then idle start and speed. Same rules for this one, etc. Next thing we have is animation, idle, moving, start, attack, ping pong. Now what ping pong means is that instead of the animation going from the first frame to the last frame and then resetting at the last frame, instead of having it where the animation goes from the first frame to the last frame and then automatically resetting to the first frame, it will then go back. So if it goes from left to right, when it hits the final frame on the right side, it will then go from right to left. And the last thing we have is animation attacks, which again has its own start, end, and speed, and ping pong if you wanted to. And remember, the way that this works, the way we're at least doing it, is you can have 10 frames. And you can have 3 of them be your moving frames, and then 3 of them be your idle frames, and then 4 of them be your attack frames. As long as they're separated far enough away, you can do that. So one image will have all of your animation in it. Next thing we go into is lock body rotation with main turn. Now what this means is that the unit will always be facing the same direction as the main turn. Since we're making an infantry soldier, which is using attack animations, this needs to be set to true so the soldier is always shooting what he's looking at. We can move on to attack. Unlike the other sections, this one isn't split into different subcategories. You're going to start with can attack. Can this unit attack at all? True or false? Can it attack flying units? Can it attack land units? And can it attack underwater units? So these codes are simply can attack flying, can attack land units, can attack underwater units, in which you can put true or false. Next we have max attack range, which is self-explanatory. The max range this unit can fire / attack. Can attack not touching water units. It's very rarely used. It used to be very useful before tags existed, and you'd have stealth units on land, but you'd have to categorize them as underwater units. And when you had the can attack not touching water units, that pretty much was only used for stealth units shooting other stealth units. Next we have can only attack units with tags. Very useful as it makes very specific weapons such as flamethrowers that can only hurt infantry, or AA that can only damage spaceships or stuff like that. All of this is based on the tags of that unit. Can only attack units without tags. This allows stealth units or special units to not be targeted by this unit based on their tags. Turnt multi-targeting. Though any vehicle can have more than one turret, having this set to true allows units to fire at separate targets. This is especially helpful when you have a unit that has multiple turrets in angle-locked positions. This is melee. Pretty much just affects the AI. Melee engagement distance should normally stay at its default unless you're an advanced modder. Turrets rotate with body. This makes the turrets rotate with the body, though it sounds similar to lock body rotation. What it really does is that the turrets will move if the body moves, instead of the turrets just staying pointed at a direction while the body moves separately from it. It'll look really weird if you didn't have this set of attack movement, which can be switched between normal and bomber. The bomber version being an attack and then retreat when energy runs out. Die on attack. Very useful for suicide units or mines. Is fixed firing. Useful for turrets that don't move. Usually makes units stop moving to aim, and it's very useful for tank destroyer like units. Aim offset spread. This makes the turret aim slightly off. No, the name says it all. It doesn't affect actual accuracy, but it gives a better visual, so not all the shots are going to the exact middle of the enemy unit every time. It's also very useful for fast firing units, so instead of you just seeing like a laser beam, it's spread all over the target. Stop targeting after fire. This makes units stop targeting after firing a shot. Very situational, but can use great effect with the next code. Disable passive targeting. If this is set to true, the unit will only attack if you select it to. When mixed with the stop targeting after unit fires, it will only fire once and then stop doing anything. It's great for powerful weapons or artillery units. Show range UI guide. Will show the range indicator and is very useful for showing ranges in radar and other related structures. And then finally we have shoot delay, which is the global shoot delay on all turrets. Not really used too much, as you can use the same code in each turret, but In this case, we're just going to use it here because it only has one turn. Finally, onto the turn section. For this unit, it's going to be real simple. We're only going to go into a few codes as this unit really doesn't have a turret per se. Now each turret will have an X and Y value which will determine where it is on the unit. It'll also have a shoot sound, which is the sound it makes when the turret fires, which can be custom or shared, which means it's in the base game. It'll have shoot sound volume, which of course is the volume of the sound. A shoot flame, which is a type of shared graphic that appears when it fires. I believe that also can be custom. And a shoot light. Shoot light requires a color code of the light you want to fire. Alright, we're almost done. We're now on to the projectile section for this unit. For projectile codes, we have direct damage, which is the damage this projectile does upon contact with the targeted unit. Then you have area damage. In contrast, it's damage around the projectile. A projectile can have both area and direct damage, meaning that it can deal a certain amount of damage to the first unit and then a different amount of damage to its surrounding units. Life, when it comes to projectiles, is used with a non-instantaneous projectile. This determines how long it stays before vanishing. It's also required for long-range or slow projectiles that aren't instantaneous, or they'll just vanish before they hit the target. Speed is the speed of the target, and draw size is the scale of the projectile. Now on to the last section, the movement section. First we're going to start off with movement type. Now movement type, you have land, air, sea, or hover. Now what this determines is what your unit can go over. So land means it can only go on land, sea means it can only stay in the water, air means it can go above everything, including mountains and terrain like that, and hover just means that it can go on land and sea. Then we have slow death fall, which makes the unit fall slowly while maintaining speed after death. We have move speed, which is the speed of the unit, move acceleration and deceleration, which determines how fast it speeds up or slows down, reverse speed percentage, which is how fast it moves backwards compared to its move speed forwards, land on ground, which is used for flying units to land on ground when idle. When it's over water or any other terrain that it can't land on, then it'll just stay hovering. Target height also only affects flying units, determines how high the unit will hover above ground, which usually only is useful for shadow. If you're going to work on air units, you're going to want to mix both the height and the shadow to get the right consistency you want. Next we have target height drift, which is if it's a hover unit, the unit will drift between certain heights. If you make it too much, it'll look like your vehicle's or unit is just erratic. So usually you want to keep this on a slightly lower point, and it's usually just for aesthetic. Then you have falling acceleration, how fast it speeds up while falling. This goes with the landing on ground too. Falling acceleration dead, how fast it speeds up while falling to death. And then the max turn speed, how fast the unit turns. Last, we have turn acceleration. So if you have turn acceleration low, but the max turn speed is high, that means the unit will slowly ramp up to its turn. Usually, depending on the speed, the size of the unit, you can't change these too much. Because if you put them too high, they're just going to be like, boop, instantly turn. And if you have the acceleration too fast, well, it's the same thing. Well, not really. If you have the speed slow and the acceleration fast, there just won't be any acceleration at all. The unit will just automatically... But it's something to play around with. Max turn speed is how fast the unit turns, while turn acceleration is how fast the unit speeds up during a turn. When I mean speed up, I mean if they're turning 180 degrees, they'll turn slower at the first 90 and then speed up as they continue to turn the rest of the 90. Not it moving while turning. When I say moving while turning, I mean like if it's moving to forward right, this doesn't determine, it goes faster while turning and moving forward. It's just the speed that the unit changes direction. Next, we have move sliding mode. This is useful for drifting units. I really don't have much to say about it, except just test it out, and if it's your cup of tea for that unit, sure. And lastly is move ignoring body. This allows the unit to move without fully turning the unit's whole body. That doesn't mean that the unit won't eventually turn over, it just means that the unit can turn. Say if you had a unit facing an angle to the left and you had to go right, it will start moving right before the front is pointed that direction. And until next time, I'm Nickredace, and I'll see y'all in the next video. Nickredace out.